class this morning. A little nervous, so if we just set those expectations real low, that would help me out a lot. So we've been going over Paul's sermon on Mars Hill. We've been referencing Mac Lyon's book, pulling out a lot of points and ideas out of there. Last week, Zach taught, and it was a really great lesson. He covered the temples and that God's not worshipped in those temples. And I found it really, really interesting because I do like architecture and buildings and some of those pantheons. They're amazing if you get to go see them. They're just gigantic, and I was really excited. I really enjoyed his lesson. And then we moved into this one, and it's got a lot of moral things and modern day things, and I was like, oh boy. But a good lesson, good material that we'll be looking at today. Lots of ideas. So, all right, God, the giver of life. That's what we're going to be looking at today. But a quick recap. Let's see. I think a lot of slides. So Paul's in Athens. He sees that the city is full of idols. He speaks with the members daily, and eventually he gets brought up to the Athenian leadership, and he talks to them. But they like to hear things new, right? All things new. That's what they seem to almost be addicted to. And if I can just take a moment on that thought, do you think it's possible, though, that people can almost have a great attraction or addiction, maybe, to just simply learning? I've heard of some people, they'll go through college and they'll just keep going, keep getting degrees, and then they never actually move out, maybe into the workforce, but they really seem to be kind of stuck on that. But then they also seem to, the Athenians, they also seem to be almost glorifying their own knowledge. They're just really set in that mindset. But Paul also says that they seem very religious. And then also we see to the statue to the unknown God. So that's where we're at, and that's what Paul is currently dealing with. So we're going to look at this verse in Acts 17, verse 25. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So small verse, but it's also packed with lots of information. Lots of information and lots of pieces that we can talk about and teach. So the first things I pull out of this is God is not an idol, and clearly he's addressing that topic here in Athens. But then we also look at what God's involvement with mankind is. I think we see that with the Stoics and the other group. But also identifies God as the one true God, the creator of all things. So that's some of the things that we'll be looking at this morning. So idols, it's an interesting topic, one that Paul is addressing. But we'll go back to the Ten Commandments, back to Moses on Mount Sinai. So Israelites have come out of Egypt, and definitely a place where they have seen lots of idols. But they've come to Mount Sinai, and they've seen a lot of great things. God has led them. He's led them out of Egypt. They've went through the 10 plagues. They've witnessed that. They've crossed the Red Sea, and now they're at Mount Sinai. And it looks like that took about 3 months for them to get to this point. So, let's see, my print's small. So when we see in this, in Exodus 20, God gives Moses the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall not have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I am the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on your children to the third and fourth generations, and to those who hate me, but show steadfast love to 1,000 of those who love me and keep my commandments. So it's interesting that this is some of the first things that God has given to the Israelites. Do you think this is, let's see, what are the thoughts on that, though? He just brings them up out of the land of Egypt. Is this something that he thinks they may struggle with? Or is this kind of one of those maybe universal all-time things? No other gods before me. What are the thoughts there? It is. I think we could be short-sighted with a slippery mind, most definitely. So this is Exodus 20, and then we move over to Exodus 32. Let me see. And lo and behold, in Exodus 32, Moses up on the mountain, and we have the children of Israel misbehaving. It says, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." When I was first reading this, I can't help but wonder what their mindset was. I have no idea. It's just they just saw all of this, and now they're wanting this golden calf to be made. And in my imagination, if you read this, maybe let me back up. It seems that they have already started to veer off of this path, off of the path that they should be on. And who knows what else may have been going on at this time. But if you almost read this from a drunk standpoint, it almost seems like it might make a lot more sense. Because they're talking to Aaron, up, make us gods who'll go before us. It almost seems like that might make more sense. But again, not really sure. Just the way that they're interacting with Aaron. Then it goes, and they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So what was Aaron doing? It brings up a lot of questions. What was Aaron doing? What was he thinking? That's an image I found on the internet.
I mean, that would be a calf I would make, but as far as it's very well done. But I'm just wondering.
Yeah, that was an interesting.
What are you looking at?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of an interesting photo, and then I think you have a little representation of Jesus here too.
No, it's cool. It's just that.
Yeah, interesting photo. But what's the thoughts about Aaron here?
Seems like Aaron's trying to split the baby, and he's introducing this new thing that they're asking for, saying, well, now we're going to have a feast to the
I think he is too. There was a little bit circular information, definitely, but in part of that information, it seemed like they had maybe went to somebody else to build that calf, and they had stoned him, killed him. So Aaron's like trying to play that middle ground, maybe speculation, but yeah, Aaron is now building this golden calf for them, but tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. And he builds this altar. One of the things I found in this study is this brand new gods that they're creating, because it just doesn't seem to quite line up. That brought you out of the land of Egypt. Well, they know who brought them out of the land of Egypt, but now they're doing this golden calf thing. It presents some interesting thoughts.
I just find it fascinating that it's Aaron, because I think even growing up as a kid, you kind of just hear that the people made a golden calf. But when you read it for yourself and you realize that it's Aaron, and you realize Aaron had a front row seat to all that happened, for him to then do this, I don't know, it's just more gut wrenching than if it was the people.
Well, according to Aaron, it wasn't really him. They just threw their gold in the fire.
This is true. Yes,
It's like
This
the
is
most
true.
7-year-old excuse they've ever heard.
Blame somebody else.
this is
I
true.
don't need this.
Maybe he was, I mean, it should have been noted, but doing the Father forgive them, they don't know what they do. And it wasn't really noted.
Sure.
The same thing, so.
I think they were drawing back a lot on the Egyptian religion and worship that was going on, but there's a lot of interesting stuff, and Aaron messed up. But why a golden calf? That was an interesting piece that I found interesting, because what we're going to look at moving through our study is so why this golden calf? If it is, and let me try to back up and jump ahead. Why this representation? It does seem like they have this golden calf, but it's like, let's build an altar, a feast to the Lord. It's almost as if they want a physical representation of God himself. Not necessarily this is a completely different deity, but this is a representation of God. And how this golden calf thing correlates, I'm really not sure. But as far as the golden calf in Egypt, here's what happened. Initially, Apis was assigned a significant role in her worship, being sacrificed and reborn. Later, Apis also served as an intermediary between human and other powerful deities. Apis was the most popular among the great bull cults of ancient Egypt. All are related to the worship of Hathor and Bat, similar primary goddesses separated by religion until the unification that eventually emerged as Hathor. And I also read too that before the time, early Egyptian time, it seems that Alexander the Great went through here as well, and he tried to use their idols to kind of unify them. So he'd make sacrifices to Apis or one of these bull deities. So they were used in quite a few different ways. But this is very, very well known in Egypt. And another part that it's not really portrayed on this one, but they'd have this sun disk between the horns, and that was a very prominent image in Egypt. So we talked about this a little bit too. So they might not have been trying to replace God, which on the other hand, that's exactly what they were doing, with a different God, but tried to represent God through the golden calf. So like a physical representation, one that they could see, lay hands on, move about, one that they could have here in their presence, per se. Um, so was so we don't necessarily see idol worship like this today, but is there, in a sense, idol worship today? God addressed this a long time ago, and maybe we could see that them coming out of Egypt definitely needs to be addressed and warned about. But what is it that we see today then? Okay.
I feel like the list, we could go on and on with the people and things that we put to the top, and some collectively and some individually.
Yeah. Anything that we could put before God, I would say, has a high and significant place in our hearts. I think once we follow our hearts out to the end of the day and what we find most important and most settling in our hearts, that could start to replace God. So we have to keep those in mind. So it's still very, very important for us today. So was this, we see Paul addressing this with the Athenians. Was this something that was really challenging to them or challenging for Paul? Or was he maybe familiar with it? We see in the Old Testament he would have been familiar with that. What do we think that Paul's thought towards this might have been? How big of a hurdle would this have been to get over with Paul, with the Athens?
I think even before Athens, right? Like, just he was a Roman, and it wasn't uncommon for the Roman Empire to, adopt new gods into there. So, like, the whole thing would have been very familiar for him. And when he became a Christian, I think he would have had to kind of set aside his political hat aside, right? And kind of like with Alexander the Great, right? They would take on gods just to, like, keep everyone unified. When he became a Christian and when he battled with it here, I think was he pretty motivated by it and has to set aside.
Yes.
I
Look.
also am wondering if, like, it would have been a challenge just to make them see that God is just not another God to add to their list.
Yeah,
This
definitely.
God is separate, and we own them. Because, just like kind of going off what Zach was talking about, it wasn't uncommon for them to add gods and add gods and add gods and adopt culture. So it would have been challenging to for Paul to make sure that this God is the God, not just another God to add to their list for the rest. So that would have been a hurdle.
Absolutely. There.
I see that Romans and other civilizations idol worship to things that's power. So don't blame us when God consider for the damages that happen. But challenge with Paul is that the scope is so widely used that it's difficult for one person to change the matter.
Definitely.
Back to the Israelites here, right? Egypt up till this point, they had all of these plagues. They had Moses in the pillars of fire. They had something there physically representing God in some capacity. Now they don't. It's Moses up on the mountain. They don't know what happened. So they're trying to solve something like that, I think. And then along with that, maybe something that they worry over a little bit more
is hard, just having faith and just going, God is there, I trust him, I'm going to pray, I'm going to worship, and it's going to come from me. But when I can add some elements to worship that I can control and really ramp it up and make it this big production, then I really feel God. When God, and that becomes an idol in and of itself. Because it's not just you and God, it's you and this and whatever else you're going to add to that. So, I think this idea of idol worship being appealing still relates to us today. Even in the church sometimes we say, we want to do, let's add this to our worship because it makes it so much better. Okay, so does it need to be better? I understand we're going to do the best we can. Obviously, I get all that. But then I guess it goes back to that idea. Then our worship becomes the idol. Because we need something to make us feel better about worshiping and feel closer to God because we can't see God.
Yeah. I think you could probably mix a little bit of traditions in there too, and those can maybe eclipse the whole thing as well. Did you have a question, comment?
Yeah, Hebrews 3, the writer talks about those people. What he says about them is, he says, and to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter because of unbelief. And he goes into mixing belief, faith, and ultimately obedience. And it's this idea, I would say, just going off of what other people have said, like, he's the invisible God, so they want something tangible to see. Obviously, the worship was very inappropriate worship to this calf, but it felt good, just like Clint was saying. Worship sometimes doesn't feel as good as it could be if it was a bigger production. It just keeps coming back to this idea of like trust and obey. But it's amazing that Paul calls unbelief just not obeying. So if you don't obey, you don't really believe. And that's kind of crazy because it's the backward with the world. It's I believe, I don't have to obey, I just believe. But that's not belief.
Yeah.
That's not faith.
Yes. Yes. Good, great points. I don't think Paul really had a great challenge in presenting the truth. God's truth. God is the only one. That's it. There's no other problem there. I don't think he had any issues with that. I think where the issues started to maybe arise was the people's habits, what they've been used to, what they wanted for themselves versus having that truth and what it actually meant, those changes in their lives, because that would change their culture, I'd almost say entirely. So where he, maybe no challenge in, like I said, presenting the information and this is the logical conclusion of it, but getting those changes and to come about with the people may have been a little more challenging. Dana?
I see a big difference between the Hebrews and the Athenians. Hebrews, I think, are looking for something to grasp onto because they have this concept that came from Egypt of regionality and difference. So they're looking for something tangible to hold on to. The Athenians aren't looking for anything to hold on to at all. They'd rather sit around and talk about big ideas than commit to anything. And that's what, it's a whole lot easier to seek perfection than it is to buckle down and actually apply yourself to something that you might see as partial.
True. And I see too those geographical separations. You had everything that was happening in Israel or Jerusalem, time of Jesus, but then you have all the way over here. Sure, they're going to hear about it, and Paul's presenting that information, but they're not getting to necessarily witness that firsthand. So in a place where it seems like ideas and knowledge is maybe a commerce, they're just trying to gather up as much information as they can, trade it, see what they think about it, digest it a little bit, and then move on. So yeah, I could definitely see the challenges that could be here. All right, so we'll continue to talk about a little bit about idols. So Jeremiah chapter 10. For the customs of the people are vanity. A tree from the forest is cut down and worked with an axe by the hand of a craftsman. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammer and nails so it cannot move. Their idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field. They cannot speak. They have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither is it in them to do good. And I feel like we've talked about this verse too, the scarecrow and the cucumber field. But what is the value of these idols? I mean, when we really think about it, is there any value to these idols at all? Of course, it's a sin problem, but I believe also you find ignorance, rebellion, mockery in these idols. So one of the thoughts that I had when putting this together, what if our children treated parents like this? So what were they saying about the idols? These are the ones that brought us out of the land of Egypt. These are the end-all, be-all. So if our children were playing with some of their dolls or toys and they started, these dolls brought us into the world. Like, all right, look here. Like, y'all. So it would be a really ridiculous thought seeing our children behaving like this, that the credit that they would give towards whatever it is, their toys, these toys taught us everything that we know. I mean, it would be such a ridiculous thing. And so I can't imagine what God would be thinking of his children, his creation, identifying pieces of wood as their God. So it's something quite ridiculous, but quite a problem. So we're going to move on a little bit. So the next part in that verse that we read in verse 25, as though he needed anything. So God is not dependent upon us, but we are fully and 100% dependent upon him. So what does that look like? If we're completely dependent upon him, it's either I think we are, or we try to skirt the line a little bit, or we think we're not dependent upon God. Where do we land on that? Is it hard to be 100% dependent on God?
I was just looking at that and thinking, either someone's experienced this in a forest and they're like, my compass hopefully is accurate, right? Or they haven't. We see movies where the person's like lost and they're like, hopefully this works, or the compass it's broken or something. So with us, it's like, all right, God, what is the compass? What direction?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Like,
I was gonna say, like, we go to work and we get our paychecks. It's really easy for us to be like, I did this because this is my job and I'm getting provided for by my work, And so it's hard for us, I include myself in there, to be like, I'm 100% dependent on God, because oftentimes it's really easy to just be like, I did this for me. I went to work, I got my paycheck,
put in the work,
I made
the
this
effort.
purchase, I did this thing. And so then it's just like, I mean, whether or not we actually say anything, consciously, it's really hard sometimes for us to really think that we're 100% dependent on God. We see the things that we're doing and we don't look at it as blessings from God.
Yes, and I see it from that point too. From we're working, we're doing the work, the efforts. We're getting that. We're doing that for ourselves, right? But then also on the other hand too, what about when bad things happen? We get fired from that job. Oh no, I got to take care of myself. What am I going to do now? It's, I think, really hard and really scary to fully and 100% rely on God. I think we see that a lot with the disciples, the apostles. What was it, when Peter was getting out of the boat? He had, a lot of faith there, but then also not a lot of faith. So having faith in God, I mean, I think I feel like its nature in itself is to be a little scary, at least at the beginning. Did you?
I'm just sitting here thinking it's funny. Laura's birthday is today, so as soon as we take her back to class, she's like, "Hey, my birthday's today." How kids do, and I'm just thinking, like, the people that made these idols. There's no way some of them didn't be like,
they
well,
had
or
part
I
in
know
it.
I did that, but I think it's really funny to, when you're mirroring the verse in Acts 25 that's saying, basically, like God created everything. He has no need for anything, and yet they're making something for the person who made them. Like it just is a, I don't know, kind of a backwards thinking that they're going to make something to represent someone who made them.
Yeah. Yes, excellent points. When you mentioned being lost in the woods, I've been there. I had a great time hiking around Mount Rainier. I did it in the wrong time of the year where there was no path, there was only snow. So luckily I had a map and I had my compass. And going off of those things alone, that's the only way I got to my next destinations and made it semi sort of successfully around the mountain. But without that compass, yeah, no, it would be completely lost. I would have been completely lost, and without the map as well. But I do feel like that is what God gives us. He gives us our bearing, and it's up to us to align ourselves with that as best we can.
Mike, it seems what Paul's echoing here is Jesus' words from the model prayer, give us our daily bread. Jesus doesn't say, pray, God feed us for a lifetime. He says, give us this day our daily bread. So we remember that every day we're dependent on God.
Yes. So I want to look at Isaiah chapter 40. All people are like grass, and all their faithfulness is like the flower of the field. The grass withers and the flower fails or fall, because of the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God endures forever. So that's an interesting passage. But what is it? What are we talking about? What are some distinctive differences between God and us? Pretty easy, but when we think about that, though, what are some of those differences that are really important? The Word of God endures forever. We have a hard time going from day to day. I would say just kind of like the Israelites. 30 days later, they're off the beaten track. They're stumbling. They're making different gods and idols. But what's maybe one distinctive difference between God?
Wishy-washy and fragile.
Most definitely.
Faithfulness. Right.
Yeah.
That's a better place.
We're temporary and not consistent. He is eternal and very consistent. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We could be in a mood swing.
Yes. Yes.
Not very patient and not very trusting at times. So we do things like they did, then we take it into our own hands to handle things
Yeah.
instead of just waiting on God.
Yeah. Eric?
Going back to Jeremiah 10, in verse 8, he's talking about people making idols. They're both stupid and foolish. The destruction of idols is but foolish.
Yeah.
Right? So basically, we're worshiping an idol. We're walking around listening to a flock of bush. So we're stupid and foolish. God's not. He knows that. Sometimes we forget that. That's a big difference.
Hmm. Okay. All right. So Isaiah 40. We'll continue through this. All right. We're going to pick up the speed a little bit. About a third of the way through. Who has measured the water in the hollow of his hand, and with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, and weighed the mountains on the scales, and the hills in a balance? Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord? Who instructs the Lord as his counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him? And who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge, or showed him the path of understanding? So, how big is God? How big is the earth, the universe, atoms? How complex are these things? And how does this describe God? So the thought here is maybe in realms of perspective. How big is God? Is God our size? Is he bigger than the universe itself? Is he smaller? There's such infinite complexity in all of these things. But it also describes God's power. How big is he? Is the universe too big for him to handle, to make? Is it smaller for him? Is it easy for him to make these things? How complex these things are is something that I think with a little bit of perspective we get to see. It describes God's character and God's qualities.
Hey, Mike, I just realized this is the verse behind that song we sing, "Behold Our God," right?
Okay.
Hey, this sounds very familiar. But it's also a good reminder as well. Sometimes it's easy for me to, it's impossible for me to get my head around it, but it's easy for me to say, God created this universe. He created space. He created time. His spirit exists outside of that. So I think in some ways it's easy for me to comprehend that he's just different than what we understand in this existence, if that makes sense.
Yes. So we'll finish up here with, got a little more of Isaiah. With whom then will you compare God? To what image will you like him? As for an idol, a metal worker casts it, a goldsmith overlays it with gold and fashions silver chains for it. A person too poor to present such an offering selects wood that will not rot. They look for a skilled worker to set up an idol that will not topple. So it's like we're asking the question, the God that created all of this, what are we going to compare him to? Wouldn't that be bringing his qualities down to nothing, to this small little chunk of wood, this small amount of gold? How can he be represented in such a thing? And then we also recall too, when we worship God in spirit and in truth. For God is spirit. So it makes a lot of sense when we're looking at it that way. God is spirit. He created all these things. That's how we should then worship him, not with the stuff that he has created or represent him there like that. Okay. Oh, so many more things. All right, I'm going to skip a lot because there's a few things that I wanted to talk about. The fall of man, murder. So we see these things, the God, the giver of all things. So we get life from him, but then we break that relationship, and then murder starts to happen. We start to lose sight of God. And I really enjoyed this depiction of Cain and Abel. I think it's very accurate and depictive. Lisa and I talk a lot about such things. It looks like he used a French baguette to strike him, because that bread can be really hard.
No more bread at Panera.
I know.
No, it's Panera.
Panera. Watch out. Be careful. Break teeth. Has anybody ever seen any of this or seen this? So I think with a lot of this, the rest of this, I'll try to make this super quick. With the rest of this, more useful tools that when we may have conversations with others in the world, this is what's called will of life. And this is a very secular idea of evolution and what you may run into. So what they say, they are some scientists. They're actually currently aware about 2.3 million species in number, increase about 15,000 new additions per year, according to some estimates. A graphic representation of a circle of life. The center point of the circle represents the first single-cell organism from which all life descends. Each color represents a different life form. to include anything that has a gene. Bacteria, fungi, animals, algae, trees, plants, animals, people, so you name it. So one of the things I see with this, because I like looking at stuff like this, is really interesting. So in other books, hopefully I don't get too far off the point, Richard Dawkins wrote a book, and we'll see that here in a minute, but he describes this. But in his book, he describes what is a hairpin model. And so you start with an animal, say a female rabbit, and trace its ancestors, its mother, grandmothers, back and back and back. And at some point, you'll turn around and you'll start coming back, and on those little zigzags that you get a different species, right? That's the idea. But in his book, I couldn't find the exact quote, but it really stuck with me. He says, we do not know what these species look like, those particular break-off points. So you get back to like a leopard or something from the bunny. So evolution. We do not know what these species look like or have any evidence of them, but we know they had to exist. That sounds really familiar. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So what they're basically saying, they don't have any idea. So every time you see like one of these little breaks, there's a hole. There's no evidence for it. So from the very first one where it splits, there's no evidence. No evidence down each one of those things. There's no evidence. To me, that presents a lot of holes in a theory. Without faith, but on the other hand, without faith, it is impossible to please him. Whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. So God requires faith of us. Science, it doesn't really work too well there. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the world, by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made of things that were visible. So there's a lot of interesting things out there, a lot of interesting ideas. Love to deep dive into those topics if we have more time. And then had some bonus thoughts, clearly not getting to that. But otherwise, happy Mother's Day to all of those mothers out there. This is my bear when she was 2 or 3 days before Rhett was born. So happy Mother's Day. Thank you guys for your time and attention and comments.